Hey there and welcome back to another Pixar video. And today I want to talk a little bit about one of Pixar's most classic films. Arguably one of their best films of all time, if not the best. And one of my all-time favourites regardless. And that film is of course Finding Nemo. Released in 2003, Finding Nemo tells the story of Marlin, a widower clownfish, and his son Nemo. Injured as an egg in an attack that killed all of his siblings and his mother, Nemo grows up under the extremely watchful eye of his father, who struggles to accept that his son's growing up and will one day need to make his own way in the world despite his deformed fin. Chafing against his father's restrictions, Nemo gets captured by scuba divers one day when he attempts to prove himself to his friends. And so, Marlin sets off on a long quest alongside Dory, a blue tang with acute short-term memory loss, in order to save him from the humans and bring him back to the Great Barrier Reef. And hijinks ensue. Meanwhile, Nemo befriends the other fish in his new fish tank at the local Sydney dental office, and to ensure that he doesn't get killed by the dentist's overly enthusiastic niece Darla, he joins in their plot to escape the tank and make their way back into the oceans, and obviously, hijinks ensue. They do lots of things. They run from sharks through old warships and avoid anglerfish on the ocean floor. They battle jellyfish hordes, ride the currents atop sea turtles, ride a pelican in an aerial dogfight against hungry seagulls on a wharf. They destroy fishing trawlers, plan grand escapes down through the sewers and into the sea, and are eventually reunited, forming a new little family back on the reef alongside Dory, where they all live happily ever after, until the sequel. And that's a pretty action-packed plot, filled with twists and turns and excitement, and my god did it do well for itself, both from a critical and a commercial point of view. And we'll start with commercial, because it's massive. In terms of its commercial reception, it grossed over $800 million at the box office worldwide in its original release, which was the highest box office return that Pixar had ever had at that point in time. And honestly, it was by quite a significant margin. And it continued to hold that spot until the release of Toy Story 3. And even since then, only the really big-name sequels have managed to eclipse it. Incredibles 2, Finding Dory, Toy Story 4, that sort of tier. So basically, this thing was so god tier that it took well-established sequels that were fueled by the power of nostalgia to knock it down the ranks. And honestly, of Pixar's original non-sequel films, only Inside Out and Coco have ever come close to defeating Finding Nemo's original run. And that's an unmitigated success no matter what way you slice it. It's Pixar's most financially successful original film, with a sequel that doubles down on that legacy and just oozes money. But of course, the money does not stop there. As in 2012, it had a 3D re-release just to milk that franchise even more and capitalize on the 3D obsession of the times, which netted it another $100 million or so. And on top of that, it cemented itself in history as the best-selling DVD of all time, which is a feat that now they're in the digital streaming age that will likely never ever be repeated. So that's just another notch in the belt for Finding Nemo, I suppose. And on top of that, it's the 13th highest grossing animated film of all time. It sits behind The Lion King, which comes in 12th, and then the rest are all films from the 2010s. An era where grossing over $1 billion on an animated film is something that's become rather common. Imagine if this film had released in the 2010s. It would have been huge. But of course, that's just its commercial point of view. There's also the critical perception of this film, and that critical perception is extremely favourable. It has a 99% critical approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and an 86% audience score, so already massively favourable reviews. On top of that, it also got a 90 out of 100 rating on Metacritic, and pretty much has rave reviews everywhere you look. People everywhere love the animation, the visual design, the clever and witty screenplay that's both heartfelt and exciting. And on top of that, characters that just drew the audiences in and were beloved by adults and children. And on top of that, it scored 3 Academy Award nominations, and managed to win Pixar's first Best Animated Feature award, an award they would go on to dominate for the next 20 years or so, still are. And so clearly, this was a massive film with a massive legacy, as I've already said. It's a massive critical and financial success. And it went on to sell hordes of merch, especially toys, it spawned video games, a lucrative sequel, and of course, theme park attractions and experiences. Perfect film, really. And from a business perspective, it did everything you could possibly want. And so, that's why I honestly think that Finding Nemo might be Pixar's most important film of all time. And you might scoff at such a big call, and yeah, I get it. It is a big call to make, and you could definitely make a number of massive arguments as to what film's the most important in Pixar's library of classics. Maybe the film that started it all, Toy Story, which catapulted them onto the world stage and is still looked back on fondly as a massive innovator for animated films. Maybe you could argue that Toy Story 3 is the most important, because it ushered in the most financially lucrative era of Pixar's history. The golden run of the 2010s, which saw multiple billion-dollar grosses. Or maybe you'd want to point at Inside Out, the film that brought about the perception of Pixar being the art house studio, being cool, and being far above the others, which were perceived at the time for catering more for children. And I think all of these are important points in Pixar's history, don't get me wrong. They're absolutely massive films that have played big roles in defining Pixar's ongoing legacy. But at the same time, I don't think there's any one film that's been more important for Pixar than Finding Nemo. It really does feel like the spark that brought them into the limelight. I mean, it was already a household name sort of studio, don't get me wrong, but this is the one that helped them capitalize on what was at the time an ailing Walt Disney Animated Studios. Finding Nemo very much felt like an announcement of, we're here and we're here to stay. There's a new sheriff in town, so to speak. And on top of that, it was by far their biggest financial success at the time of its release and for many years afterwards, and continued to generate absurd amounts of passive income after its home media release. And in my eyes, this is really what makes it the defining film for Pixar's early history, and catapulted them to continued and sustained success. I'm not saying that without Finding Nemo, there'd be no Pixar, because that's quite obviously bullshit. But for me, Finding Nemo feels like their Lion King moment, you know? Where this random little film about animals comes out of nowhere and sets the world on fire. It becomes insanely popular, earns a shit ton of money, and embeds itself into pop culture as one of Pixar's ultimate nostalgia experiences. I feel like everybody holds up Toy Story films as holding that position in Pixar's history, and I get it, but to me, that just doesn't really feel right. Toy Story 1 is almost like a Snow White level film. It's really good, it's really awesome, it's well received and lucrative, but it's the opening act of the studio. It shows off what they can do and pushes forward a new style of animation. Meanwhile, Toy Story 3, it feels like that fits more the Frozen role, where the studio really starts swinging for the fences and just starts printing money relentlessly. But I think that Finding Nemo is where they forged their reputation. Much like how those early Disney Renaissance films forged Disney's new reputation after like a decade or more of mediocrity. The 70s and 80s were rough. And in much of the same way, Finding Nemo definitely felt like a coming out for Pixar. Proof they have the potential to become a financial juggernaut going forward and dominate the box office, dominate the animation industry. And what do you know? They did, and they are. And so yeah, I guess the purpose of this video is to say that whilst Finding Nemo is not an underrated film, because that would be a ridiculous statement, I do think its importance to Pixar's rise as a studio is hugely understated. And I think it deserves a lot more credit for that. But of course, with all that being said, these are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of Finding Nemo? Do you think I'm right about what I said, or maybe you disagree with me completely? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.